I'm really honored to be here today and talking to you. Yes, I am going to ask you to draw. But first I want to share some thoughts about drawing. Let's see. And some drawings on thought. I'm an artist, and so most of the work that you're going to see are my actual drawings. And for me and many others who draw a lot, constructing ideas and observations through drawing is more important than expressing or representing things that already exist. Drawing makes thinking visible. Thoughts not yet ready to or able to be put into words can be put down sometimes in arrangements of marks and lines. So very few 5-year-olds think they can't draw, but when you talk to a lot of adults, I hear this all the time, I can't draw, and it's almost with a sense of pride. I can't even draw a straight line. So I think that's fantastic, because straight lines are actually kind of boring, and they're annoying, and sometimes they're downright frightening. So I'm going to ask you to take up your paper and pencil right now, and without looking too carefully at what you're doing, I want you to just make a little scribble. And you're going to be making more than one, so you can keep that in mind. You got that? Okay, another. I think about 5 or 6, maybe. Okay, you ready for the next step? For right now, look at the first one that you made. Put a dot somewhere. Little triangle. A couple legs. Try it again, a little differently with the next one. And there's actually research that shows that you can focus better when you're doodling than when you're just sitting around. It helps to focus the mind, maybe quiet the default network a little bit. So feel free to keep making doodle birds for the rest of my talk. It would make me very happy. Last one looks a little bit like a duck to me. So messy lines can actually get you somewhere that you are not expecting. Disorder, confusion, and ambiguity can provide opportunities for surprise. They lead you to see, understand, and imagine the world just a little bit differently. And sometimes it's just kind of fun. So, art and science, we have something in common. There's never a final answer. It's always a process. There's always more questions to ask. In science, the test is for validity. For validity is about reproducibility, am I right? That's sort of what you look for. In art, it's a little bit different. You're looking for maybe a pulse, a sign of life. So this is how I start out. I'm a painter, and but I really think through the drawing. So it's kind of murky, ambiguous, hopefully a little mysterious. Slowly, I make decisions. Some clarity develops. And only at the end, near the end, does the color come into play. This is a very traditional way of working, by the way. I aim for in the end, some final sense of coherence, but also to not close it down, that there's still a potential for movement. There's a sense of something just happened or something might happen next. I want the viewer to be able to get lost in the details, to feel invited to enter this strange world and try to make sense of it. And to be able to see, not just in this case torn fruit, but perhaps animal forms, human forms within that. Maybe oceans or mountains. It's a kind of non-judgmental Rorschach test that the viewer is invited to participate and maybe find something else, something new. I show my work. I do teach. I taught for many years as a teaching artist in New York City, K-12, high poverty schools, and now I teach young pre-service art teachers. And working with children, they'll see all kinds of things in these paintings. It's really fun to ask. But I'm also interested in drawing because I really hate bad drawing. It kind of makes my skin crawl, and that's part of why I started doing some research on drawing. And my definition might be a little bit different than yours. I think it probably has more in common with your definition of bad science. So, yeah, so to me, this is a really terrible drawing. So what constitutes bad drawing to me is unwarranted certainty, or perhaps unwarranted uncertainty, which I think have something in common these days. But going back to good drawing, there's actually a lot of research that has been done in looking at expert practice among not just artists, but designers and architects. And there's 3 key findings that I would want to point out to you today. Experts use ambiguity and indeterminacy to prompt discovery. Experts improvise based on prior experience and knowledge. And experts postpone solutions in favor of possibilities. So often non-artists think about drawing. They think about drawing for accuracy, hitting a known target, producing something that looks like something else in the world or in your mind. But artists such as myself and others who really love drawing, we draw for the process of what might emerge that we are not necessarily expecting. And I love this quote. This is from Staff Sergeant Ken Ebo of the Marine Corps Jazz Ensemble, who said, "All instrumentalists feel that their instrument is somehow an extension of themselves. And improvisation is not just making it up as you go along. It's being creative in and around a known set of boundaries for which you've prepared a great deal." And I think that definition of improvisation, of this kind of open-ended process, cuts across artistic disciplines. It's a kind of drawing in and drawing out. Drawing in the affordances, the opportunities of the present moment in conversation with the knowledge, skills, accumulated experience that come from inside the artist. So I did a study. I was interested in my colleagues, my fellow artists. I did a study of 8 contemporary artists' drawing practices. These are professional artists exhibiting and who were over the age of 40. Because I was interested in people who had a long established practice. How do they keep it fresh and new? And I chose artists that worked in a variety of different ways, from observation, from inspired by biological processes, nostalgia, purely from the imagination, using references. This is a large wall drawing. So using different scales and materials. And what was really interesting about this is that all these different artists were so diverse. I wasn't quite sure how I was going to make the connections, but I drew, because that's how I know how to make connections. So I drew from the videos. I did a whole long series, looking at the gestures, looking at the movement of the tool across the page, watching the artist climb up and down her ladder, really seeing how these drawings evolved over time. Listening to the conversation that happened between the artist and her subject. And what I found when I really looked closely was there were 5 types of drawing actions that I could segment the video into. I had videotaped the artist drawing in their studios, looking over their shoulders, and then I had done retrospective interviews with them immediately after viewing. So there were 2 general categories of actions: new marks in new areas of the drawing and marks revisits. So at first you have to locate, begin to put down some points of where you're going to start your drawing. Then extending outward, clusters develop in the drawing, and then the artist began to connect these clusters into new wholes, combining parts to form new wholes. And then going back again, revisiting again to reinforce, making things look more three-dimensional, adding depth, and finally revising. And I also coded for spatial placement. And I used Gabriella Goldschmidt's linkographs. I was inspired by them to create diagrams which integrated time sequence, type of action, and drawing marks in new areas and revisits to established areas of the drawing. These are super complicated, but I'd be happy to discuss them with you further. But the time goes from left to right, and then the new areas are on the at the beginning, and then the revisits are coming from the other side, and the color is spatial location. And this really helped me to kind of get in a single diagram this whole way that the drawings unfolded over time. So basically there's a beginning strategy, locating and extending, and it's when the connections start to be made between the parts to create a sense of whole cohesion is when the drawing really seemed to take off. So there was this alternating kind of feedback loop between focus on specific details and working towards overall coherence. And there was a kind of rhythm that each artist found that was fairly individual in this alternating attention from specific details to overall coherence. A kind of back and forth that would be very rapid for some artists and much slower for others. So I made another kind of diagram using, really focusing on that. So the petal forms are the attention to specific details, and the arc-like shapes are jumps between areas, connecting parts to form wholes. And you can see, as I charted the different artists, you can see how in the upper left, there's a lot of jumps, not so much focus on specific details, and on the lower right, the opposite. So this was really interesting to be able to see how they were doing the same things but in different ways. I talked to them. As I said, I did immediate retrospective interviews, and I aligned what I observed about their actions with what they said about what they were doing. And these are some of the things that they said. At some point, the drawing seems to take over. I'm putting myself in a situation I'll have to work myself out of. When it's going well, it's like you are surfing. That's when you know you are really working. The drawing takes over. It's telling me some stuff, and I'm telling it some stuff. You are driven by the drawing. It's not just you anymore. So this is a really curious statement. You hear it a lot, and I was really trying to figure out, what is this? So it's, obviously there's not another person in the room, there's not another agent, but there's this feeling of, maybe a little bit like what Jonathan was just talking about, that there's other voices, there's somebody else in the room. So it's a kind of interaction between top-down, a conscious awareness of planning, evaluation, explanation, judgments, in interaction with what's coming from the bottom, the perceptual cues, the habits and routines, the emotional tenor that starts to be established in the drawing. And artists and others who love to draw talk about this as the most rewarding thing when you start to feel that dialogue. And I heard this from my participants, and I hear this all the time when I start talking about drawing, is that I love drawing because drawing is a way to have a conversation with myself. So lately, I've gotten very interested in hyperactive agency detection. This idea that we see as humans agency where in random phenomena. I think this is part of what artists are picking up on, which is part of this larger phenomena of pareidolia, seeing shapes in the clouds. I think this is, again, a universal human experience. Leonardo talked about looking into the stains of walls or the ashes of a fire or clouds or mud, or like places in which, if you consider them well, you may find really marvelous ideas, because by indistinct things, the mind is stimulated to new inventions. So what do you see? I'm asking you guys out here. A lion, a rabbit, or a rain? What do you think? Drawing is a tool for learning, and this is something I'm really excited about as an educator. Sometimes can be more effective than words. Like gesture, it makes it possible to externalize thoughts not yet ready to put into words. And unlike gesture, it makes it possible to inspect those messy, half-formed notions, revisit and revise, detect and reinforce pattern and order. So there's this whole wonderful literature that's emerging on drawing to learn. I don't have time to go into it here. I want to refer you to this wonderful recent literature review about all the different layers of cognition and sociocultural, go ahead, capacities that go into making this a really effective tool for learning. And one of the things that I really love about it is that it is a way, it always makes me happy when art and science can partner. So just to finish up, I want to talk to you about what drawing can do. Drawing is a place where you're able to try things out, imagine possibilities, play out scenarios that would be impossible or disastrous in real life, plumb the depths of our deepest fears and desires, not to express them, but to investigate and interrogate them. Dive below the surface of conscious awareness, pull up stuff we don't know we know, slow down, draw, and notice, question things that otherwise might go undetected. Drawing harnesses and integrates multiple sensory motoric capacities for perception, action, and cognition. What lurks below the surface of conscious awareness? Ambiguities stimulate our curiosity and imagination. Errors and false steps in our thinking become visible. When we are lucky, occasionally we might pull up a pearl of wisdom. Things make sense for a brief moment, but this is not the end. There is always more. More questions to discover, imagine, and invent. Drawing allows us to trace the shape of our thoughts on paper, to be revisited and revised without limit. As artists, as scientists, and as humans, as long as we are still breathing, we are always perpetually circling around understanding.